Welcome to Cracking Legal Innovation. In this episode, we're joined by Andrea Miskolczi. Andrea and I met several years ago at Lexpo and found ourselves kindred spirits on so many topics, including the one that we're going to discuss today. Andrea is founder of InterAlia Consulting and former innovation lead at Dentons Europe and Theiss. Prior to her innovation leadership roles, Andrea spent several years as a practicing lawyer and then professional support lawyer at Linklaters. Andrea shares her experiences delivering successful implementations of legal tech platforms, including HiQ, Jigsaw, and Legatix, and will explore what it takes to roll out new tools effectively inside complex firms, how to engage different personas, how and why gamification can work in law firm environments, and what early signs of good or bad adoption looks like. So welcome, Andrea. I'm also joined by my co-host, Legatix CEO, Anthony Seal. So would love to start the conversation on the topic of implementation, asking the question of when should you start thinking about implementation? Like at what stage of thinking of bringing in a new piece of technology within the firm?
It's a very important question, and it's often overseen because actually you should start think about implementation day one when you start think about the project. Like technology is a good investment which is not adopted and properly implemented and used at the end. So whenever you start think about, okay, I have a problem, a process where technology can help, I do my scouting already at this phase, you should start think about like, okay, for this particular type of technology, for this particular type of problem, maybe a group of lawyers, what could be at the end the best implementation? Shall I go probably with a big bang, probably with a one-by-one implementation or deep dives with groups? So already this kind of different approaches, it will also influence your pricing negotiations, whether you buy a large group of licenses or you go slower and increase them slower. And of course, it also creates the entire strategy for the project and making things happen. And of course, all the change management aspects you can already think about, because maybe you want to tease people, maybe you want to start talking about this in a creative way to create expectations and to set the scene. So I definitely would recommend to start think about it as early as possible, probably just when you start with the entire project.
And how do you think about it, actually thinking about that implementation? Is it done in isolation? Like when you were in your innovation lead roles, were you doing that sort of sitting down, thinking about where the need is? Are you speaking to the lawyers? Like at what point as well do you engage with the potential vendors to sort of think about how that implementation might work?
Definitely the vendors are a very important source for best practice. So you might have an idea and the first, plan how to implement, but definitely the vendors have seen that working with other firms, with other teams. So it's definitely something that you discuss with the vendors as early as possible when you start in the scouting project, and then later in the testing. What would they recommend? What they think about your implementation ideas, or what they suggest you?
That's great. Well, I think maybe if we're moving then on to sort of thinking about some of the reasons why implementations succeed or fail, do you maybe want to give some initial thoughts on that? What are the main factors that lead into successful or not successful implementations?
A big question, big topic. I would start with the overall general challenge, difficulty to adopt technology. So you don't have to think about the legal sector, any business. Implementing technologies is challenging. I think maybe it was Bill Gates or someone like this type of thought leader said that if you invest 10 units in the technology, you have to invest hundreds, so 10 times more in the implementation, adoption, training, and so on. So that's generally an overseen factor. And then I think additionally in legal, we could blame the lawyers, and we usually do at conferences. We say lawyers don't change and so on. And yeah, sure, there is some truth in that the legal industry is more cautious and risk averse and so on. But I would also like to mention another potential reason for not successful change management adoption implementation examples. Most of us in these roles, including myself, you mentioned at the beginning, I used to be a practicing lawyer. So most of us come to these innovation legal tech roles with a legal background, legal skill set, and as lawyers, we work very much with our so-called left brain. So analytical, logical, reasoning, argumentation. And in most legal cases that works. You analyze, you think about it, you write your memo, and the client takes it and follows it. But in innovation, legal tech implementation, it's not so simple. So usually what we do, and including myself, probably the very first software I wanted to introduce, I thought the managing partner would write an email to everyone and done. Everybody will follow the instructions. And no, it doesn't work like that. So usually what we have to learn, and most of us learn by trial and error, is that you need a completely new skill set. You have to work a lot with your right brain. You have to use a lot more empathy and less logical arguments. I also always say, like, change is not logical. Don't argue that this or that technology makes sense. I mean, lawyers like to understand why they have to do this or that. But still, if change would be logical, we would all hold our New Year's resolutions, right? Because those are usually very logical, very, good ideas. Do this, you will be healthy. Now, I don't know how about you, but I constantly fail with my own New Year's resolutions. So change is difficult, and it has more to do with the change management skill sets and psychology and empathy and communication and so on than the classic lawyering skills.
I think there's a big part of me that, like, back in the day when we first sold our piece of legal technology, that also thought the managing partner was going to send the one email and everyone would just start using it. And the reality, I think, is just so far from it. And the amount of work that we do on basically behavior change is huge. You think you're starting a technology company, you're not. You're starting a behavior change company, of which the technology is a small part. I find it really interesting from being outside the organizations as well, though, that we're seeking to change. So we do well when our software is adopted, but we're not inside those organizations. So it's really fascinating hearing the kind of what's happening inside the organizations and whether people in the organizations are also thinking there's that one email from the managing partner that's just going to go and everything's going to get adopted. But I think we've all moved on from that thinking. And I think you've got a wealth of experience in making these things happen successfully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm interested, Andrea, on a few things that sort of came to mind when you were speaking. What is your view? I know different firms have different approaches about how much of it should be carrot versus stick, how much of it should be actually going and just saying, this is wonderful, come to it, versus actually sort of forcing people to change their ways. Do you have a view on, whether it should be carrot or stick or both?
It should be both, but not really sticks is what I would use as. So definitely carrots should be applied, and those are welcome. But I think what is difficult I think what is important is to remind yourself how lawyers are incentivized. So I wouldn't use the word stick in terms of like classic management, do this, do that. Lawyers are very independent by nature, autonomous, independent professionals. So in some firms, you have managing partners and leadership and culture where it works. But in most firms, they kind of like do this, do that. Doesn't work unless you implement it in the incentive system, in the target agreements, in the, expectation setting side of the management. So in that sense, it becomes immediately a topic which is beyond tech, which is beyond implementation of technology, and it becomes part of the overall strategy and management of the firm. Now, of course, you can't run and adjust the incentive system and the target agreements by every single technology. But what I think is important is that there is nothing or as little as possible in the incentive system which works against you. So the classic example is if your lawyers are incentivized by the number of hours, this is their number one target measure. And many law firms have moved away from that in the last decade, I would say, but some are still using this, at least with the associates, how many hours you work, how many hours you bill. That works against everything which should increase your efficiency. I'm not saying it completely blocks, because certain things you just can't do because it's impossible. You need technology. But in many cases, that works very much against all the intent to doing. So the sticks, I would use it in this way, like clever sticks included in your incentive system and in the entire target agreement setting.
I'm really curious as to what firms have been using where they're not using number of hours. What have you seen there?
I see many firms starting to move into the direction of efficiency or profitability, even though it's not the overall real profitability, but like kind of an efficiency figure, how work has been generated. Or also, if it's not the hours, but revenue which is used, that's already better than the number of hours, especially in you work in areas which you can set fixed fees and this kind of non-billable hour type of fee arrangements, then you can operate nicely with that. But I think there is still a journey here, and many firms don't have the business operational system to really use these KPIs, and it's easy to say and more difficult to change, to implement.
Andrea, how much do you think culture plays into this as well? Because you can have changes to the actual incentive structure, but I know from my own experience when I was working as a lawyer, some of the things that weren't specifically part of my incentives, like, for example, helping support knowledge management on updating precedent within the firm, I knew they were valued by, for example, the partners in my team, and it would go towards promotions and things like that. And it was more of a cultural thing that it was something that was valued. Do you think that's also material from a technology and implementation perspective?
Definitely. Culture plays a big role, and the culture of the firm, culture of the team plays a big role. This is one of the reasons why there is no one, master technique that you can imply in all cases, and not even like a set of tactics, and that's it. But it depends a lot on the culture of the firm. So a few examples. I worked with a firm where they were full lockstep and very cooperative, and they have still the culture like inviting associates, joining the ranks, and then climbing up and becoming partners. The classic route. But additionally, the individual partners were rather competitive between each other. So they were like a really lockstep collaborative firm, but very competitive. So in that case, you have to bear in mind, okay, it's a collaborative environment, and people will listen to you and work with you, because this is the one firm. We are in this together. Big emphasis on we. But additionally, you can use that little competitive edge of the culture to make things a bit faster. Also, in some law firms, it's a very hierarchical, very, very much top-down culture. There, of course, that famous email from the managing partner might reach more people, at least. Let's put it like this.
I was about to ask in the competitive law firm how you relate that back then to technology adoption. I can definitely see the managing partner sending an email where everyone does that in the top-down firm, but are there sort of different ways of using that culture to your advantage when your goal is to drive technology usage?
Yeah. So generally, law firms, of course, are competitive with each other, so they always listen to what the other law firm does, and you shouldn't innovate on the basis of the competitor's press release, sure, but you can use that as a little bit of, increasing the encouragement, like, on this market, the other law firms are already using this. Let's keep our position in this group. But also within the firm, you can use a little bit like these partners have, or those teams have used it already, and they're very, very happy. And, like putting it in a context that it's something which is cool, which is hip, which is, like positive. So, okay, they are in, at least I'm curious and look into this.
Andrea, on the topic of culture still as well, I think a number of people listening to the podcast will be involved in global firms that have different offices with different cultures. I suppose particularly with, say, Dentons Europe, where you had a number of different offices across Europe and different cultures. How do you think about that from a technology implementation perspective and how to engage with different offices and the cultural nuances?
It's a very important question. And yes, there are substantial cultural differences between countries within Europe or globally, but I have more experience with European firms, both my background and I also work with European firms. And basically you will see in the practice, or you see in the practice, that there are countries where usually you can do the online demo. People are easier to, more curious, open. And there are other countries which are more conservative. So you might have to fly in, you might have to sit down with the managing partner or the chief operation officer or someone, and you might have to take a few more formal steps that you don't need in other countries. So a lot of, empathy and kind of tailor making. It's also like sales, right? So you are selling an idea, and you tailor make your sales proposition to your target, like how I package the message, how I communicate. So definitely the different cultures within Europe or globally are something that you have to consider, and you can't apply one size fits all from London. I have seen that so many times failing.
It's just so much work, isn't it? Like, going back to what you said at the beginning of there's 10 units of technology purchasing and then 100 of implementation. You've got different culturally ready strategies for all of the different offices that might require you to fly into some, create kind of competitive dynamics in others. It's just huge, the amount of work. And I think a lot of innovation teams in law firms aren't necessarily that well resourced as well. I think
Yes.
the expectations on them are huge. And sometimes they've got organizations of thousands of people that they need to communicate with and engage, and hopefully do that in a culturally appropriate way in all these different places that play to the things that are going to motivate those lawyers. How do you do that? You don't always have a huge amount of resource.
Yeah, I definitely think, Anthony, that's a big challenge in most organizations, that you don't have enough manpower, enough people to actually do the work as you would like to, as you probably should in an ideal case. So definitely the number one ingredient that a head of innovation needs is patience and kind of good, how you say it, like keeping simply your head down and continuing, like perseverance, I think is the word. But also probably what I would say, and I also just worked with a firm in such a use case, is if you have a journey, create milestones where you can demonstrate the impact, and go milestone by milestone, demonstrate the return on impact, and try to get more resources or more support with that. So yeah, if you have a big journey and just head down and going through with your mini team is really difficult. Try to, but on the other hand, yeah, if you don't have a supportive leadership management, it is even more difficult. So winning over your leaders, your managers, the partners is crucial.
So we'll definitely dive in a bit more to the different personas and how to win over the different people. But what I'd love to maybe just dive into for now is, I know a topic that we spend a lot of time talking about when we first met, actually, which is sort of thinking about the initial main implementation. And I know you've had great success on multiple occasions now using gamification in the implementation. And I was fascinated by this because it's something that I know Anthony and I talked a lot about sort of early on, and like in terms of like how much fun can you actually have with doing this, and how receptive are lawyers to actually being a bit silly and having a bit of fun with things. So I'd love to get your perspective. You've done this multiple times now and have done it successfully. So yeah, maybe if you could sort of give your reflections on it overall, and then some of the specific examples of how you've implemented.
Yeah, happy to. And I think ultimately these examples go back to to the point that we discussed earlier, that you have to use your right brain, you have to use empathy, communication, storytelling. And, fun is also rather your right brain. And in this bucket of ingredients, and not really the classic, how we imagine the classic lawyering skill set. So couple of examples from my own practice or experience. What I did was, one example was HiQ, where we rebranded the site to Theiss Space. Most law firms rebrand the site. Most of them use something like Collaborate, Connect, something like this. And we used Theiss Space, and we started to play with the topic of the universe. So the entire user interface, we changed a bit, like it was not login, the button, but lift off. If you clicked on the help button, the email said, Houston, we have a problem. We didn't call people site administrators because nobody wants to be a site administrator. Lawyers definitely don't want to be a site administrator. We call them captains. So we really said, you are the captain for this site. And so we really played a lot about it. We had a client event where the purpose was to show our clients that we have this platform for collaboration. And at the event, the site or the demo was only 10 minutes. And it was like 80 minutes about the universe. A well-known Austrian scientist talked about the stars. It was really, really fascinating. And yeah, but one additional example. So we really played it. It was so much fun. We played it to the edge. There was an event, we discussed use cases. And so we said the muffins are space cakes. And of course, they were not space cakes, but it was like the team really had fun with thinking about how we can get more and more ideas. And I always say that one of the moments when I said, okay, it works, the message works, is when a relatively senior partner called me and said, Andrea, if you will have a telephone hotline, the waiting music could be from Jamiroquai, Return of the Space Cowboy. I said, yes, I got you as well. So it was really a good story and a very rapid adoption. There was another case which also demonstrates that you can't you can't play the same music every time. In another case, what I did is I basically tailor-made my message partner by partner. So if I say now that, and maybe some of the colleagues who are looking at us, they think like, oh my God, partner by partner, I will never end with this. But it looks slow. You get 30 minutes from a partner. And you tailor-make your message as much as possible for his practice, for his sub-practice, for his team. And it might look that you go slower, but actually it's in that case, it was more efficient than big webinars and big meetings. And then, of course, those who are converted start talking to each other. We also work now with a law firm, kind of a gamification type of aspect. They introduced a badge system. I've seen that also by others. So basically, if you just come to a demo, you get a belt, and then if you reach this kind of usage, you get another belt, and so on. So it kind of a little bit playing with the competition aspect, rewarding people with such gamification examples. Yeah, I think these are the best. Oh yeah, and maybe one additional thing in connection with adoption is that in many cases, you have to create safe spaces for the people. And that's also, I mentioned this example, going partner by partner. We work now also with another law firm in connection with a recently introduced tool that they went partner by partner and sat down and showed. And it was not because the message had to be tailor-made in that particular case, but they wanted to create a safe space for the partners so they can ask the questions, they can, experiment together with the legal engineer.
How do you balance with that? Because we were talking earlier about the challenge from a resource perspective for innovation teams, and what you've described in those early stages is very resource intensive, having to go and win over individual partners and tailor the messaging. So how do you balance your time and the time of your team going and doing those things that don't really scale, with thinking maybe we'll come to that in a moment, but once you've then got those early signs of adoption, focusing on initiatives that are more at scale. How do you think about that?
If you have at least a small team, then you almost create something like a standardized process. So you, as the senior, have the half an hour with the partner, and then the demo is done by your legal engineers, legal tech specialists. For the demo, already you can bundle people together, provided they have a very similar or somewhat similar, of flow. Can bundle for most technology. You shouldn't bundle, I don't know, a transactional lawyer with a litigation lawyer for a demo. But I don't want to lie, Danielle. This is a lot of time, and it takes time. But on the other hand, it's not linear, because, as I mentioned, they start talking to each other. So it's a process like this, and you get faster and faster.
Yeah, we've seen that where you put a disproportionate amount of effort, and somebody described it to me once as lighting fires. So it takes a lot of work to kind of get a fire going in one place, and then you start another fire somewhere else, and then after a while those fires start to grow and spread, and maybe a few of them go out and you have to kind of go and relight some and start some. But once the fire takes, people talk about it at group meetings. They talk about how they're doing the deal. They see how other people are using the technology. I think it naturally does spread, but that disproportionate amount of energy at the beginning, it does remind me of like a lot of startups that have had to do things that didn't scale. And you hear stories like that, the Airbnb founders literally going around to all of the people in the beginning, sort of finding out like who's using the service, how they're using it, understanding that, getting things going, tweaking the service, tweaking the messaging. I think you learn a lot doing those things that don't scale to then move on to the activities that do.
Yeah. And also I would add that you might think it's slower to talk to people one by one, but I wouldn't underestimate the time that you have to invest in big webinars with a lot of slides, with events. For me, it was easier to reach out with an email, set up something, and also create the personal connection. And in that, at the beginning, I mentioned that actually our legal skill set might not be an advantage for the adoption, but actually the fact that most of us or some of us practice law also has, of course, positive sides in this change management adoption. Like, you connect with a lawyer, you can empathize more. There was one case where a partner told me in one of those one-on-ones, like, "Oh, I've heard so much about innovation. Nothing happened. Don't waste my time," almost, or maybe literally those were the words. And I told him, like, I know, I feel you completely. I used to be a managing associate by Linklaters and working on deals until 3 a.m. So if anyone would have come to me with a piece of technology the next day, I would have screamed. So thank you for not screaming. And then it's a little bit like you bring yourself in, you create the connection, and you can achieve with things like with these conversations that you are heard.
And then that's the same person who starts suggesting the songs for the
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. In this case, that partner at the end of the conversation, he said, "Okay, I will ask my team to join your session," and the team become converted, and they use the technology. So it went well.
So much of it is about just winning hearts and minds, isn't it? It's early on, it's probably leads on well to maybe talking a little bit about the different personas that we do need to sort of target, but those things that don't scale early on can have a disproportionate impact, later on down the line. Winning over that partner that you just mentioned, Andrea, just to switch from saying, "Don't waste my time," to saying, "Okay, I see the benefit here. I'm willing to advocate for my team to go along and to see this and to use it." I mean, that's huge. But yeah, maybe talking a bit about the personas. Like, how do you think about breaking down the personas of a law firm?
So many law firms or so many innovation heads or innovation teams make the kind of mistakes, and I'm guilty in that as well, is that you go to people who are easy to convert, who are nice to work with. And if you are lucky, these people, lawyers, partners are also influential. If you are lucky, they are rainmakers, and the other partners really listen to them, what they are doing and saying. But if you are not lucky, then you might work with, for example, senior associates who are fantastic and creative and adopt the technology, but whether they or these and these teams use something, it might not make a big difference in the eyes of the rest of the firm. So you have to balance between the innovators, early adopters, and the laggard. Don't go to those who are really difficult to convince, of course, but focus on the middle. I always say, I had this chat with an in-house team the other day, that it's like the election, right? If you are running a campaign, you have people who will vote probably on your party, and you have those that you can't persuade. You leave them and you concentrate on the movable middle. This is the change management term, the movable middle. And so concentrate on the movable middle, and also concentrate on those who have the status, the kind of the role in the firm, formal role or informal role, who are the opinion leaders, kind of rainmakers, influential partners, influential up-and-coming senior associates, where you really benefit from saying, like, he or she is converted. Are you interested to look into this? There was an adoption of a CRM tool back in more than 10 years. Oh my God, very early days. CRM, you have to share your contacts, and that's a cultural challenge for many partners. So there, for example, I went to really those, and we went for a lunch, even slower adoption process. Go for a lunch with those few whom you really need to get on board, and then saying, like, he or she has already shared his contacts in this software, has a big influence on the others.
Just on the topic that you're talking about, that movable middle, because I think it's really interesting. I can totally see that. I think, as you noted, a lot of the innovation teams do tend to focus on maybe those who will be the early adopters that they know are going to be tech forward. Do you start with that movable middle, or do you start with the easy ones to get on board and then leverage them to move that movable middle? Like, how do you think about those different, like, if you're breaking up the ones who won't move at all, don't bother with them, the movable middle, and the ones that you know will be an easy win?
Probably it depends. If you have to work on use cases, for example, if you have to create a few tangible examples, then of course it's faster to start with the early adopters. But if you have a tool which is easy to use, you have the training. I'm not saying like ignore the early adopters, but don't think that because you have the early adopters, you are done. And your real time investment should be on that movable middle. But of course, the early adopters, the innovators, are your best friends at the beginning of the journey. But be careful whom you put on stage when you want others to listen.
Yeah, I think we used to have a phrase which was like almost start with your champions. And I wonder if we should refine that a little bit to sort of, once you've got the champions, at least make sure you're working in that middle phase. I'm curious, Andrea, whether you think there's sort of different types of technology, and whether certain types of technology require different strategies or are easier to adopt than other pieces of technology. How does that play in?
That plays a big role, of course, and that's again, I can't emphasize enough that there is no one recipe for tech adoption. It depends on the technology and the culture and the firm and so on. So of course it is completely different if you have a tool which is easy to use. It has a very defined scope of use cases, and then your implementation will be more like training and then coaching the usage and looking after your people. There is technology where you have to, for example, work on the use cases or teach people how to, for example, all those no-code, low-code tools. It's not like you do a training and then wish them good luck. It's more like sitting down, going deep and working on the use cases, or also now the AI assistants, the AI tools. I know law firms where we work together. They go very slow, sit down with a team and process mapping, really use cases, because they say the better the usage, the more the return on investment on the tool. So that's one strategy. In other cases, might be same tool, exactly the same tool, fits to the firm better a big bang and, democratizing the solution. So it depends a lot on your firm, on the expectations, whether you have to demonstrate the return on investment to your management very soon. And of course, it depends a lot on the technology. How should people use it and when, and how big the team is? Is it for a specific group of practice areas, or it's for everyone?
Yeah, it is something we think about a lot. I'm always aware that we almost design sometimes for adoption first and then think like, how do you kind of solve the problem? So you think about adoption as you're solving the problems. You think, okay, we've got lawyers managing things in big tables in Microsoft Word. Let's make the interface look like a big table in Microsoft Word. So we're not so they don't have to move much to change adoption. Or like we always operate on the principle of like a lawyer should be able to just get like started on their own. It should be,
Yes.
2 a.m. The buttons should have names with things on them that they can relate to, and language in the software that they can understand. There shouldn't be sort of technical language that's aimed at an IT administrator. It should be like, I need to create a transaction binder. I need to create a new matter. These are like the terms that people can see and relate to in the software. And then also where we brought in a lot of flexibility into a version of the software as well. I think there was a huge risk there where we almost like lost some of the practice area specific content. And I think that was like a big like risk to adoption. We spent a lot of time thinking, okay, well, we're going to have to use a big templating engine to make sure that even if lawyers don't quite like our examples, they see themselves in the software straight away. So if I'm a finance lawyer, I'm faced with use cases that are financing. And if I'm a real estate lawyer, I'm faced with real estate use cases. I definitely think there's like a big role for people who make software to be thinking about those sorts of things as well, and not putting all the weight on the lawyers or people who are implementing.
Definitely, the user interface, that it's easy, intuitive. It's extremely important. If you look at all the legal tech solutions, there are many cases where people try to do the same, and they think it's not rocket science. It's this technology and those use cases. And they fail because they underestimate that aspect, like it has to be an appealing user interface, appealing for lawyers. And there are some discussions, usually on LinkedIn, whether there is such thing, and there should be such thing as legal tech. Why we are so special, legal tech? Isn't it just tech? Yeah, but at least then let's use tech made for lawyers, and then a little bit let's for example design the user interface with lawyers in mind, how they work, what tools they use usually, what they are familiar with.
It is interesting because I think processes do evolve over time to the technology to a degree, but the technology has to evolve to the processes that lawyers have. If we think about the space that we're in, transaction management, project management, arguably, and I know some firms have tried, do you use something more generic like an Asana or a Monday.com? But you very quickly come up against the barriers to what you can do. Now, that might be very useful for certain types of project management, but not for for transaction management. And you're right, I'm sure there'll be some people that listen to this that think, well, no, I actually could use that. And I know some firms have implemented it in certain areas within the firm to a strong degree, but generally the feedback that we get is it is really difficult from ultimately an implementation and an adoption perspective, and the functionality, the nuance that's actually required for the way in which lawyers work. And lawyers, in our experience anyway, like, they don't have a huge amount of patience. If it doesn't work the way that they need, if it doesn't look how they're expecting it to, then they won't use it, and they won't come back and they might give it a second chance. They're not going to give it a third chance.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we also have to bear in mind that this profession has a big, liability, professional liability on every single lawyer on their shoulders. You can't I don't like when people overemphasize the failing, try and fail. It might not be so funny in the legal industry to fail. So why don't you use a technology which knows that, for example, in a project, in a transaction, there are different parties. Different parties can see different documents. And now I'm going into details of the platform, that you upload a document, the other party can see that you have uploaded but can't open. Other projects might not have. I I worked only in law, but I assume that this kind of, we work together, we want to make things happen, it's a transaction, but still we are on different sides. You don't want to mess with that. You can use general project management for your, internal HR project, which is like probably the same project like in a non-law firm or similar, but legal processes have these peculiarities.
I think we do need to be careful when we complain about lawyers and, being risk averse or nitpicking over things and things like that. Like, it might be, maybe we have something in the platform that we've designed that, somebody you've got, I don't know, a banking syndicate, and you can see when some people should see which banks have signed off, but the borrower shouldn't see, I don't know, should see that all banks have signed off, but not each one or something like that. And it starts to get into these like really nitpicky conversations and things like that. But actually, it's huge. It's like their fundamental professional obligations that they're trying to maintain. And if they don't,
Yes.
it's a huge claim. And I
Yes.
think what can seem a bit nitpicky, and like, or you're being a lawyer to maybe somebody like a technologist or an engineer in your team or something like that, you're like, no, this is like fundamental to being able to use the technology at all. And if we don't let those lawyers bring, that great professional standards and compliance and things like that, then this also doesn't work as well. So I think that's one of the things that does make legal tech a thing rather than just tech as well.
And if a tool is widely used on the market, if the tool is widely used by the clients, then maybe it's really safe to go with that tool and not to be overly innovative to bring something in from a completely different sector. And I can't emphasize enough that this professional liability, it's about the profession of the individual at the end of the day. If you make a big mistake, it's not only like, oh, okay, we lost this deal, it went to the competitor. If you are lucky, then that's where but if you are not lucky, it's like bang, your entire career, your brand, professional brand, and now I'm talking about the personal brand of the lawyer. I don't want even to mention big potential claims that might come to the law firm. So, try and fail might be useful in certain things, but maybe not in every area.
Yeah, it's your practicing certificate. I mean, I read the examples of, fast startup growth, and it's like, try this. If it doesn't work, iterate. And you're like, we can't go like messing with people's legal transactions or breaking confidentiality or something like that. This is different.
Yeah.
Andrea, back on personas. So we talked about kind of breaking down the, those movable middle, the early adopters, the ones who won't move. Thinking of the different roles that people have within firms. So you talked a little bit about engaging, one-to-one with the partners, some of the group trainings that you do, which I'm assuming is more for maybe the associates or the junior lawyers on the deal. How do you think about all those different personas? You've also got the support staff or the, professional support lawyers. You've got maybe project management teams in a bigger firm. Even within that, below partner level, there's trainees, you've got the junior lawyers, you've got the associates that are mid-level, almost partner. You've then even amongst the partnership got your junior partners all the way through to the most senior partners. How do you break down those personas when you're thinking about the implementation?
Again, it's important to tailor make your message to that particular group and the pain of that particular group. So I talked a lot about partners. Their pain is profitability, or their pain is competitiveness. We are not using it, and their competitors use that, and maybe clients ask for it. For the associate, it's not like profitability and efficiency. It's that whether he or she has to sit until 3 a.m. and manually list documents in an Excel, this kind of extreme examples. So you tailor make your message, and thanks that you mentioned the business support colleagues, because they are very often overseen ally assistant secretaries. There are still many firms who have these professionals who, by the way, are doing these days much broader tasks and jobs than in the past, almost like legal project managers. And by the way, legal project managers are a very important ally group when you implement the technology, if they are a separate group to the innovation team, because they might be in the same place like your associate.
And what what role does the vendor play as part of supporting you with tailoring that message? I mean, you obviously know, you're a former practicing lawyer yourself, you know the firm, we talked about culture, you can adapt that to the different cultures of the different offices, but what role does the vendor play in supporting you with tailoring that message and even maybe doing demos or enabling the users to use the product?
A big role. I always say the clients that if you have very limited resources internally, you have to consider how much support will I get from the vendor in the implementation. So quasi, you have to think about outsourcing your legal engineering, and the vendor has experience and they might have done the demo. Actually, they did the demo probably several times and seen best practice. So they have the experience, but also they will be your outsourced legal innovation team. If you have a huge team and a lot of internal resources, then maybe you do all that internally. Then you might not need that. But I always say, especially in continental Europe, where I am advising a lot, where there are not so many law firms and legal operations teams, law firms with a big innovation team and in-house teams with legal operations, that aspect is a very important aspect of your evaluation. Don't just look at the tool, also look at the support that you get after signing and after launching the product.
I think that is like very often overlooked by teams. We've always, I mean, I think it's something that law firms could use more, is the vendors, because they have done it before. They know where the easiest wins are. They've seen this exact product roll out in many different places. It's in the vendor's interest, if you want a good renewal, to basically enable that adoption. So you're usually very aligned. And sometimes we find ourselves like a little bit kind of like locked out of some of those relationships, though. Like we have teams that are like, no, we've bought this thing now. We're going to handle this. We're going to do this because we really want to like do it our way. We put a huge amount of resource into this. We create all sorts of resources like template intranet, content slides for people to use in pitches. We discuss rollouts. We discuss how we can fit a rollout appropriately to culture. We spend, I think, more on that kind of thing than we do on sales. So we're always really keen to help. And where we do help, I think we make a big difference. But sometimes we feel like a little bit locked out by a team that really wants to control everything or do it their way. And then sometimes that also goes really well, and then that team, goes and smashes it. And then sometimes we get frustrated if we see them not doing it or not doing anything, or just sort of being, I don't know, too scared of people within their organization to really go and sort of make a difference.
I think it's an interesting one, Anthony, because to Andrea's point initially, I think it's about the collaboration between the vendor and the client and the customer. And I learned a lesson in humility early on, because we'd seen really successful implementation with a couple of firms, and we had a bit of a blueprint for how this is going to work, and went to customer number 3 and kind of laid out, we've got this blueprint, follow this and adoption will be amazing. And it was just, they had invested a lot internally in their own innovation teams and their way of doing things. And also it's a case of actually listening and understanding, because there are nuances about a way each law firm has their own nuances. It may have just so happened that we had 2 very similar profile firms that we got adoption going. And it's important to listen and to understand, fine, this might be the blueprint. We've seen success happen multiple times, but what is it about your firm and your firm's culture that you think this might not work? And then it's actually also asking the question, how can we help? We're here to help. If you want us, we can deliver the trainings ourselves. If you prefer, if you've got the resource, we can do train the trainer. We can, empower and enable them. Let's listen and let's understand what the cultural nuances are in the different offices. If you want us trying to coordinate, if we're going to a certain area for a conference or for whatever else, do you want us to go in and do it in person? Because you mentioned earlier, culturally, that team is going to relate better to in-person trainings versus these others that are going to be, much better on a webinar style. Maybe they're going to be cameras off or cameras on and be engaged or not be engaged. But it's that collaborative sort of environment, and actually the true collaboration of almost building the implementation together and being bought into what that plan is. But I think you have to show some humility in that process, in my experience. And it was a lesson for me early on where I think I didn't do that particularly well. But yeah, would love your thoughts.
Oh, I definitely. I mean, you being involved, it's like you are additionally consultants in connection with adoption. And particularly if you have seen a lot, and you guys have seen like really a lot of successful and less successful adoption journeys. I also, there is this popular question, buy or build in various areas. And I always say, like, definitely in certain areas, there is an advantage to build and so on. But if you buy that know-how with the tool, the adoption know-how with the team. Maybe you buy basically also use cases or ideas how to use that technology beyond the obvious, main use cases. So I think that is something that especially smaller teams should consider, what they get beyond the technology piece itself. They get your best practice experience. They get the community, other law firms using the tool so they can maybe meet and exchange and so on. And they get the ideas implemented in the tool.
Andrea, conscious of time, we could talk about this for hours. conscious of time. So just a couple of final questions. I suppose once you've actually implemented, thinking about what some of the early indicators of an implementation being successful or not being successful, what are the signs that you would look for that it's on track or it's going off course?
Yeah, in an ideal world, you have your KPIs, you have data, and you can compare like this task. How long did it take before and after? And you can really demonstrate with figures the time saving that you have achieved. Or also in an ideal world, you have client feedback, clients who are happy with the tool, if it's a client-facing tool. At the end of the day, I sometimes say partner happiness is my favorite KPI. If I see that people use it and it gets adopted and more people use it and they use it for the right use cases, then even if I don't have the hard figures, I can see this is happening. And also using it for the right use cases, it's very important. I hear these days so many examples where people roll out these legal AI tools and then people use it for translation and very simple use cases. Yeah, but going back to an idea where you have data and you can compare what you have actually achieved and what's the tangible return on investment.
That's fantastic. Thank you. We talked a lot about playing to the culture of the firm, the subcultures within the firm, winning over managers, winning over partners, gamification, doing things that don't scale, getting partners to the point where they're suggesting songs in connection with your innovation project, sort of how technology can vary, and letting vendor in as almost another consultant to a project. If you would sort of, I don't know, summarize with one piece of advice for perhaps somebody who's trying to lead their first major rollout in a law firm, what would you say to that person?
I would say don't start with your legal skill set. Invest a little bit of time asking around. The legal community, I think, is a very open and collaborative community. So if you haven't done that yet, ask around or go to conferences and collect a little bit of use cases. Listen, collect, but then go with your own journey, because there is no one recipe. There are good examples. You might actually follow one of those examples, but you might work on your own adoption journey and tactics. Yeah, I think, and then the other thing is definitely, if you are at the beginning, work with or try to pick technologies where you have a team who supports you and they have seen it. And as we mentioned, they can act as your consultant on the project and can help you with know-how that you can maybe also use in another adoption case after that. So that would be my advice.
It's brilliant, Andrea. Look, thank you so very much for taking the time with us today. Always enjoy our conversations, and today has been no different. We could easily keep going for another hour, but I will, just say a huge thank you to you. I'd encourage anyone who's interested in engaging with us more to connect with Andrea on LinkedIn. She's often on the circuit around Europe at the various events that are on. So hopefully people have an opportunity to connect with you in person as well. But yeah, just a huge thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.
Today.
Thank you for giving me the stage. As you can see, I'm very passionate about it. So I like to talk about
That's what
it.
we
So
love.
thanks for the invitation.
Pleasure.
Thanks so much, Andrea.
Thank you.